The Diocese of Gallup. The story of the faith in this region began with the labors of zealous missionaries, was nurtured by holy bishops, priests, and nuns with a deep love for native peoples, and carries on today under the leadership of its current apostle, Bishop James Wall.
So I would say some of the unique challenges is giving voice to the Native American people. So we want to, as best as we can do, allow the Native American peoples to have their voice heard within the church.
This is the story of the bishops of America, the shepherds of the past and the shepherds of today, who through their callings and ministry carry the church into the future. It's also the story of their parish, their church, the cathedral. This is The Chair, an exploration of what it means to be an apostle in America. In northwest New Mexico, 120 miles south of the Four Corners region, where the states of Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah meet, is the city of Gallup, Sea City of the Diocese of Gallup.
The rugged terrain surrounding Gallup was a popular filming location for Hollywood westerns during the 1940s and 50s. But the history of this region goes back much further. Gallup is sometimes called the Indian capital of the world for its location in the heart of Native American lands and the presence of Navajo, Zuni, Hopi, and other tribes.
The Native Americans were the first, they're indigenous people of the land, and they were first to receive the good news. So if you think of a place like Florida, which is very early, you think of a place like New Mexico, which is also very, very early, you had the Spanish missionaries coming up. Other places you have the French missionaries coming up. So I think there's always been a great receptivity, and we've had Native American tribes who have been, Catholic for centuries. But sometimes it can be viewed as this is an Irish church or German church or a Hispanic church or things like that. But really, it's also a Native American church.
The first known Catholic in this region was the Spanish Franciscan Marcos de Niza, who arrived in the Zuni area roughly 100 years before the Pilgrims landed on the eastern coast of North America. And his life is really the stuff of legend and of mystery. De Niza was in search of the cities of gold, and his journey from Mexico took him nearly 2 months, until he reached a point about 40 miles south of the current-day Gallup. In his journey, he saw a settlement, which was actually a Zuni pueblo. He sees it only from a distance, but his enthusiastic description of the area led many other Spaniards to come into these northern regions in search of the 7 cities of gold.
He has this wonderful report that is rather controversial in its nature, in that he and a Moroccan envoy that helped him were the reconnaissance team for the explorer Coronado. When De Niza reports back to the Spanish that he's seen this city, the conquistadors in Coronado immediately go out into the area.
Spanish conquistadors in Mexico City, led by Francisco de Coronado, rush into the area in the following year with De Niza as their guide, only to find nothing but a humble pueblo. Fray Marcos returned to Mexico in shame and died there in March of 1558. In future decades, largely as a result of the way in which Spanish soldiers and conquistadors treated the native people, Franciscan missionaries who arrived to evangelize the native peoples had to work patiently and with deep devotion in order to win the trust of the people, which they eventually did, but not without struggle.
The efforts towards evangelization were not always welcome. Back in the 1680s, the native tribes actually rebelled against the Spanish missionaries in the Pueblo Revolt. It was a moment of sort of cultural assertion on the part of native tribes against what they saw as Spanish intrusion. But one of the things that's interesting in reading about the stories of Native American religious life is that in the midst of those rebellions, you also had members of the church who rescued sacred items, statues, altar cloths, and kept them within their families and preserved those holy items over the course of generations. It really speaks to the way that the local community preserved its own faith, often in the absence of priests and kind of a robust church infrastructure in the region. This is how the faith was kept alive in those communities.
One of the things that becomes very important for the Franciscans, not just in this area of New Mexico, but in any of their missionary efforts around the United States, was they really took the time to learn the language, to learn the culture. And as they brought their evangelization efforts to these communities, as they brought Catholicism to the communities, they were open to trying to understand how can Catholicism be applied to the Native American approach to religion rather than just trying to stamp European Catholicism into the situation.
Later on in the history of the diocese, one notable figure who worked in the Diocese of Gallup was Catherine Drexel, who was a Philadelphia heiress who used her father's banking fortune that she had inherited in order to fund the work of her missionary religious order, the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament, who had a special mission to serving Native Americans and African Americans throughout the United States. She and her sisters established St. Michael's Indian School in Arizona on the edge of the Navajo Reservation. It was a very difficult project for them. They had to sort of travel out to the region on foot, by mule and mule cart in order to reach the local population. And once they were there, they had to convince the native peoples to send their children to this new school that she and her sisters were operating, often against a great deal of sort of questioning and uncertainty about the motives of the Catholic Church and her religious order. But the school flourished, starting off as an elementary school and later establishing a high school that still serves the community to this day.
Originally, the area of Gallup was under the jurisdiction of the Vicariate of New Mexico, and then the Diocese of Santa Fe. But by the mid-1930s, it became evident the Diocese of Santa Fe was just too vast to serve all of the Catholics in the region. To better care for the spiritual needs of the people, and of the Native American people in particular, the new Diocese of Gallup was created in 1939, comprising the northern part of Arizona and the northwestern part of New Mexico.
Father Espelage is a Franciscan, in keeping in the tradition of the rich heritage of the Franciscan community serving the Native American population of the area of New Mexico.
The second bishop of the diocese, Bishop Jerome Hastridge, had a deep interest in Latin American affairs, organizing the Latin American Missionary Program during his time in Madison. This group sent roughly 100 volunteers to Mexico each year to work with the poor. With such interests, Bishop Hastridge was a natural choice to shepherd a diocese in the southwest United States that was so materially poor and in need of care. And he was installed as bishop in 1969.
Bishop Hastridge was someone who had always been very concerned with the needs of the marginalized and the poor, and had worked throughout his life as a priest, focused on Latin American affairs as well as people with needs. When he arrives in Gallup, which is considered to be one of the most economically challenged dioceses in the country, he almost sees it as not a sense of irony, but made the remark that God called my bluff. I've talked about working and the importance of working alongside the poor my whole life, and now I'm given the opportunity to really put my money where my mouth is.
The center of liturgical prayer and the mother church of the diocese is Sacred Heart Cathedral. The parish was founded by Father George Juilliard in 1899, but the present Sacred Heart Cathedral building dates from 1955. Franciscan friars served the parish until July 1st, 1981, when it was passed on to the diocesan clergy.
It's a red brick building, and he built it up kind of on the hill. So if you're driving by on the I-40, if you're driving down Route 66, if you're driving around the town, it sits up on a hill. It really serves as a beacon for all to see. So I think it really draws people in, Catholic and non-Catholic.
And it does have a distinctly modern aesthetic, but it is really very classically inspired. It has great proportions. As one processes towards the altar through three-pointed arches, it gives a great sense of rhythm. The coppered ceilings are a reminder of the creation act bringing order to the heavens. The interior is very closely related to the exterior, so there's that great continuity. Brick features heavily, both as the exterior material as well as in the interior. This is a basilica-formed church, and we really understand with great clarity what's important in it based on where it's positioned and how it's decorated. So the altar and the crucifix at the end wall, the altar wall, are decorated using brick, very subtle patterning to let us know that this is the most important place because this is where the sacrifice of the Mass takes place. Very subtle diamond-shaped patterns is an allusion to the local native tradition of decorating. And the wood, brick, and glass are really notable features of the artistry program at the cathedral. The crucifix is really a fine sculpted work of art, and each liturgical furnishing is really carefully thought out. And so you see the body of Christ crucified. Directly below, a little arch surrounds the tabernacle where the consecrated host is housed. Directly in front of that, the altar sacrifice made of wood. The cathedra, which is the seat of the bishop, is also crafted from wood, so really noble materials.
The cathedra, or chair in the Cathedral of the Sacred Heart, represents Bishop Wall's authority as the Apostle of Gallup.
I was born on the Navajo reservation. I was born in Ganado, Arizona. My father was a teacher and a football coach. I think if he's going to tell you, he would have said he was a football coach first and then a teacher. I have 2 brothers and 3 sisters, so 3 boys, 3 girls, just like the Brady Bunch. So my 2 older brothers played football as well as I did. And for 7 years in a row, my dad got to coach one of us. But it was good. I think, being in school, you had to be on your best behavior. If not, my dad was probably the first to hear about it. He was a good man. Never laid a hand on me. He was a good man, really good man. My 2 older brothers were all very, very close. We were all in college together. I was fresh. My oldest brother was finishing up, and my middle brother was there too. We were all down at University of Arizona in Tucson. And just through conversations about faith, just in passing, I wouldn't say there were anything that were very deep, but it allowed me to start thinking about things and kind of thinking about things that are eternal. So 19, I started to ask those questions. And then when I was about 25, 26, I really started to ask those questions. And that helped me to understand the vocation. And, I think, unfortunately, a lot of people fall into their vocation by default, and they don't ask that essential question. And so I wish I would have known that younger, that was really important to do. I try to impress that upon high school or junior high, even young people. The question is not, Lord, so much, what do I want? But rather, what do you want? And I think when that started to happen in my prayer life, that's where I started to contemplate that. And that's when the vocation came back. That's when it started to be strengthened. That's when, again, I got this incredible sense of peace. It was a done deal for me once I went into the seminary. And then it was only a matter of, is it the church's affirmation that I'm being called to the priesthood? I remember that. There were 3 of us ordained together. But I do remember my entire family being there. And one of the things that stood out to me the most was my brother, who was just above me, Craig. He was outside the church. He was away from the church. He had gone the evangelical route. On the day of my ordination, my intention was that my brother would come back to the faith, his wife would become Catholic, and they would bring all their children into the faith. And not too long after that, he did that. And he said to me that on the day of my ordination is when he knew he belonged back in the church. So that was my intention, and he knew that. I think that wasn't anything really to do with me. It was all the Holy Spirit. When I became a priest, and I was assigned at St. Teresa Parish in Phoenix, which is an awesome parish, wonderful parish, met great people there. I think a lot of it, the challenge was, getting to know how to be a priest. So that was a challenge, but it was a good challenge.
As a priest, Father Wall served in a variety of functions, including parochial vicar, pastor, and vicar for the priests. On February 5th, 2009, Bishop Wall was appointed by Pope Benedict XVI as the 4th bishop of the Diocese of Gallup.
I was almost shy of 11 years. So I wasn't a priest that long. That's why it was one of the reasons it was such a big surprise. I was 44 at the time. So I was serving in the Diocese of Phoenix, priest of Phoenix, and it was Saturday morning, and I was getting up and getting ready to go down to the chancery. So 7:50 a.m., get this call, area code 202. I thought, why do I know that? Why is that familiar? And I listened to the message, and it was from Archbishop Pietro Sambi, God rest his soul, the super nuncio, as they called him. And he said, Father Wall, this is Archbishop Pietro Sambi from the nunciature. Please give me a call when you can. So I thought, okay. I called him up, and I said, Archbishop, this is Father Wall returning your phone call. And he said, Father Wall, the Lord has a big surprise for you today. And I said, oh, he does. What is it? And he said, our Holy Father, Pope Benedict XVI, has appointed you as Bishop of the Diocese of Gallup. And it literally was like, they always say, if you see a tidal wave coming, you can't get out of the way. That's what it was like. And it just built and built and built. And once he said that, I can't tell you a thing he said afterwards. And I was just sitting in this tiny little office all by myself. And I said, I guess my yes was, okay, what do I do now? That was my yes. And he said, he had a funny response. He said, you write a letter to the Holy Father. He said, take your time, but not too long, which to this day I still don't understand what that means. But take your time, but not too long. I said, okay. And then he said, just as the Lord called Peter and Andrew, James and John, he's calling you. And again, my name is James Sean, James John. And that was the affirmation. And so when I hung up the phone, I remember kind of putting my head in my hands, and I just said audibly, I said, I got to go to the chapel. So I went to the chapel and spent about 40 minutes in prayer. I'll never forget that day.
In the years since becoming bishop, Bishop Wall has worked to shepherd his people in this unique part of the country, working in particular to serve and to give voice to the Native American Catholics who live in the diocese.
When we visit certain parishes, certain reservations or pueblos, we have 5 pueblos and 2 reservations. And so when you visit them, maybe on a feast day, you'll get opportunities to speak with their governor or their president. And that's a good way to talk about some of the needs, some of the concerns that they might have. But it's also a way of showing just your presence shows support of the work that they do. I would say some of the unique challenges for the Native American peoples are poverty, a great amount of poverty. I think we deal a lot with substance abuse, primarily alcohol, but also drugs now. I think another challenge is giving voice to the Native American peoples. Because they were the first people here, I think many times they don't think their voice is heard. So we want to, as best as we can do, allow the Native American peoples to have their voice heard within the church. So the first Native American saint, Saint Kateri or Saint Kateri, depending on how you say it, Tekakwitha. I had the privilege in 2012 to take 83 people, mostly Native Americans, to Rome to hear Pope Benedict XVI at the time to announce no longer Blessed Kateri Tekakwitha and call her Saint Kateri Tekakwitha, which was super exciting. And what I noticed after that was at the rite of election, those who were going to come into the church before Lent, the percentage of Native American peoples that would come to the rite of election went up about 25%. So we have a lot of people that love St. Kateri. We have Kateri circles in parishes where they come together to strengthen each other in faith under the patronage of St. Kateri. We recently, along with the Knights of the Columbus and Southwest Indian Foundation, we had a groundbreaking and a blessing of a St. Kateri Rosary Walk, which we hope to be a shrine not just for people locally, but for Native Americans and non-Native Americans throughout North America, that they can find a place to come here, to pray, to learn about St. Kateri, ask for her intercession, and to hopefully do what all the saints want us to do, grow in our relationship with our Lord. So I would say seeing yourself as espoused to the church is espoused to your people, Catholic and non-Catholic. And so for me, to love my spouse, and the ultimate act of love is to desire the good for the spouse or to lay down one's life for one's friend. And so I think that's one of the ways I love the spouse, is to try to point them toward heaven, to realize this is not as good as it gets, that the goal in this life is not to amass as much wealth as possible, but the goal of this life is to have your heart set on the Lord, which sets our heart on heaven.